Welcome. Okay, thank you all so much for being here this morning. My name is Emily. I'm a DJ at WXOX. I will be your host today. So I'm going to help kind of moderate our questions in the chat box and help us move through the hour. I did want to make some quick conference announcements though before we do begin. Grassroots stations are more important than ever to a global listenership in distress. We would like to thank our sponsors that recognize the importance of college and community radio. That's Pacifica Network, SCMS Broadcast Equipment Solutions, Spinitron, Broadcast Tool and Die, and Mad Pixel Art and Design. Love it if you could submit a survey at the end or at any time after this session. That's going to be virtualgrc.org/survey. We also have t-shirts for sale. There's a Zoom disco tonight and a happy hour. At the end, I'll put all of those links in the chat so you can make sure you don't miss out on any of the fun things happening this weekend. And as far as the way today will work, we are going to hear a presentation. We are also going to be able to engage in a little bit of a chat. So the way that will work is once we're ready for questions, I will read off questions from the chat box. I'll ask you to use your camera or your mic, and then you can engage directly and ask that question. Until then, feel free to post anything in the chat that you'd like, and I'll kind of keep track of things from there. So I'll keep that chat box open, and if anybody has any questions, you can let me know. And otherwise, we will go ahead and get started with the program in just a moment. The Santa Cruz are starting hyper news and reporting during emergencies. I'll let you take it on from here, Rachel, and please make sure everyone has their mics muted during the conversation.
All right, thank you so much for having me at the Grassroots Radio Network conference. I'm so excited. I have never been to one of the conferences, but I am a veteran of some of the early National Federation of Community Broadcasters wonderful party conferences in San Francisco and various other places where we had pirate radio stations going and fun things like that. So I'm missing my radio crew. As she mentioned, I am from Santa Cruz, California, and you might have noticed from the news coverage that we have been on fire for the past month and a half in various ways. Right now, there's no fire threatening me right now, but I am speaking to you from the fire zone, the heart of the CZU fire aftermath. Outside my window, I'm seeing a pretty crispy forest, and I'll share what that was like to be reporting during an emergency. But just a really bit of background on me and the station before I show you a little PowerPoint. We're going to listen to some coverage that we did during the CZU Lightning Complex fire, which at its final gasp burned 86,000 acres of forest and homes and lost something like 1,900 structures and 970 homes. So that's kind of the scope of what we faced. I've lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains for 25 years. Before that, I lived in Eastern Kentucky and was on WMMT and had plenty of stories to tell, which I'll save. There were plenty of disasters, because we were living in a crazy time. And I've been on community radio on and off since 1981, which just shows you how young I am. When KUSP, our big community radio station, went bankrupt in 2016, what a year. We think 2020 is bad. It was pretty bad in 2016 too. We were watching it slide into oblivion, and a bunch of us were just trying everything we could to save it. And some of us have had been kicked out of the station, but we're trying to do what we could to shore it up, or at least buy the license so that it didn't end up in the hands of the religious broadcasters. But despite all the money we raised to try to buy the license, the huge amount of licenses they held, it covered pretty much the Central Coast. We were outbid by the Christian Broadcasting Corporation, EMF. we regrouped and raised money to buy a license, and finally raised the money in 2018 to close the deal. We closed the deal on a license that was a little bit smaller, but it reached most of Northern California. I mean, sorry, Northern Monterey Bay area. Wouldn't that be nice if it reached most of Northern California? It was a little bit smaller than KUSP's, but we kind of reconvened some of the stalwarts from that time and launched a new station in February 2019. So I'm going to do a little sharing of a slideshow that shows you some of our station, and then you'll understand how the timing of this station going online coincide one thing after another, which some of which I know you're all dealing with. So I'm going to move my presentation here, and I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a sec to have fun here with that. Hopefully it'll do what I want it to do here. And I'm sure there's people here in this session that I've met before, so it's nice to see you virtually. All right, hopefully you can see that. Here we go. So figured I'd reference this song by Marshall Tucker Band, which I listened to when I was 15 and never again, but here you go. Fire in the mountains, lightning in the air. I actually was in Oregon on a trip far off my digital fast at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. When I came out of the mountains, texts were blowing up from home, and what ensued was a crazy drive to get home in time to rescue some of our stuff. But backing up to 2019, after we had raised the money to buy KSQD's license from the Christian broadcasters, we had to build the station, and we rented a space from the County Office of Education. This is our engineer, Chief Engineer Sandy Stone, building KSQD with lots of help. We had to train a whole slew of volunteers to fill a non-existent air schedule, and there were people who'd never done radio before. Thankfully, there were a bunch of people who had been doing radio for 35 or 40 years, so we had a good match between the veterans and the newbies. That's Brant Harrett, Gene Kretzer, who's on our board, literally painting the studios as it came together. We needed to get out in the community really quickly because we're in a pretty saturated media market where there's a lot of other stations, but there was no community radio at all. There was KZSC, which is a campus radio station, but they changed their schedule every quarter and pretty much shift a lot of their programming. So we felt there was a real gap in coverage and community service. So out we went to every possible fair and party and everything else we could get to. Here's our first anniversary party in February, probably the last time we all got together to celebrate in person in numbers more than 3. It makes me both happy and incredibly sad to see all these faces that I haven't seen in quite some time. As you know, we've been all separated by COVID. That's King Dub and his bird. Actually, that's someone else's bird. That was our big party. 300 people came. So fast forward, we've been on the air, 9 months or so. Prior to this, there had been enforced shutdowns by PG&E that knocked us off the air and everyone else's power out. They were turning off power for large swaths of Northern California, so we had to raise money to buy 2 generators so that we could always be on the air no matter what. And finally we did, and so when the CZU fires broke out, because there was a freak lightning storm that came up from the Gulf, there were something like 125 lightning strikes a minute all over California, especially Northern California. And for you East Coasters, this is something that does not happen in arid California very often. It's once in 50 or 100 years. But because we are in the thick of climate change, I think every bet is off about what is normal. So when it broke out, it looked like a tiny little fire, and I was still in Oregon, and I heard, well, it's not that big, it's about 25 acres and 25% contained, so great, I'll just rush for home anyway. And as I began to drive, the news got worse. It was the fire in Boulder Creek, which was about 20 miles over the hill, had grown to something like 30,000 acres overnight. And the fire on the west part of the ocean side had joined it, and they were marching down toward my community of Bonnie Doon, which has about 3,500 people in it. But that was just one of many communities threatened. There were lots of very rural communities. Boulder Creek, has population, I think, of 15,000. Felton, maybe 6,000 or 8,000. So these tiny little communities are nestled under the redwood trees. And as the fire grew and began to advance, the news, personal news, started to hit me. My friend Nibby's house was the first to go. She's an organic farmer. So the personal losses were adding up. And then I thought, we've got to get information out to people. So we assembled a crack team of reporters who ran into the field, literally got their recording gear going. Some people just had phones. We had an intern, Patrick Hart, who had never done any field reporting really. We had some seasoned people as well. And with the consent and complete support of our program director, we ran into full-on coverage. We recruited somebody who had been sort of tiptoeing around the edges of our family of 126 volunteers, Tony Rosamano, who had been a television news reporter, and he's won a bunch of awards, but he was in retirement, and we dragged him out of retirement. And he started reporting round the clock from the CAL FIRE briefings. CAL FIRE is our statewide firefighting force. But the real story that began to come out, because I was a local and because I was an evacuee and didn't know if I had a home, the real story that started to come out, which was not the official story at all, was that residents had decided to stay behind and fight it themselves. And that, nobody really knew that except the people who were secretly ferrying them supplies over the blockade. So I managed to get up there and get my cars out while it was still burning. And I'll show you a video of that in just a minute. But these people had trucks, they had chainsaws, they knew the mountains. And the bigger story was CAL FIRE was nowhere to be seen the first 2 days of the fire. People were basically fighting the fires themselves and putting out their neighbors' homes' fires. And that went on for the first 3 weeks of this fire. People were sneaking across barricades. They were handing supplies like gasoline. And that piece of the story we managed to report where no other people had, no other media had. So we also caught up with people in shelters. They opened shelters all the way across the county. 70,000 people at the height of this were evacuated. So that's almost a third of our county was displaced. Not all of them were in danger, but they made the decision to evacuate Scotts Valley, which has a huge population. So suddenly everyone was on the roads and everyone was on the move. They had no idea where to go. We needed to tell them by the minute which shelters were opening. They had, and I'm not kidding you, some people had wrapped their chickens in bags. They had a bunch of grocery bags full of chickens. Some people had llamas, people had donkeys, they had all this large wildlife. And pretty quickly the SPCA shelter filled up, and then another shelter filled up, and people were streaming into the fairgrounds. So it became a crazy situation. And as we heard these things, we rushed out to these shelters to try to find out what was actually going on. And it was a rapidly evolving situation. You might get a press release from the county once a day, but what you didn't get was what's happening right now and who can donate to whom, and how do we get these donations to the people who need them. They opened up a donation center and people were flooding in there because this outpouring, once the news began to leak out of our county about what was happening, people wanted to help. So just coordinating the kind of outpouring of generosity was another job that we fell into. A woman called and wanted to donate 50 servings of soup. Like, I don't know where you bring that. Bring it down to the Civic Center and someone will enjoy it, I'm sure. A lot of people left with nothing on their backs. They did not have their go bags. They didn't have time to get out. And so they needed everything. They needed clothing. They needed food. They mostly needed comfort. So we decided to provide, round-the-clock reporting as best we could. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of the fire, then I'm going to back up and play you a little audio of what we did. So this is the map. It's hard to tell how big this is, but this is the map at the end of the fire. It ended up consuming 86,000 acres. You can see the town of Boulder Creek, Ben Lomond, This is Scotts Valley, and it evacuated. Santa Cruz did not evacuate, but it was the site of the evacuees. This is where my house is. No, sorry, this is where my house is. I always thought that looked like Godzilla about to attack. The embers flew across the green zone and ignited two of my neighbors' homes and burned to the ground. House to the ground. They came within 10 feet of my house, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But that's a lot of people to be in motion, and we never will know whether they were all listening to us or not. But as we started to report, we found out a lot of people were, and we told them we were. This is another neighbor's home in Bonnie Doon, where they stayed to defend it because it had been through 2 other fires. And of course, there's a lot of animals displaced during a fire. So the animal shelters, the native animal shelters, were starting to fill up with little baby owls that had been singed and baby raccoons. It seemed like the baby wildlife was taking the hardest hit. So when I say mourning, one of the things about community radio that's beautiful is you can be a human being. You don't have to put on your fake controlled reporter's hat all the time. As the news came in that Big Basin, the home of the giant redwoods, had burned to the ground, and Alba Schoolhouse, this 1906 schoolhouse that was a historic building, and Pie Ranch, where they used to hold square dances, we began to not only mourn our friends' lost homes, but these sacred places that not only we had come to value as part of our respite and beauty in our area, but the whole world had been here visiting these places and began to pour in with not only remembrances, but support. This is the town of Boulder Creek in the middle. Above them was the fire coming down toward that town. It never entered the town proper, but it pretty much burned the mountains around and above there, and in Big Basin, which is just above there. Here are some fire shots that local reporter Shmuel Fowler of the Sentinel took. He's a colleague of mine. There were Cal firefighters after a couple of days of them not being able to be there because there were so many fires all over California, but we were one of the first to really flare up. Often trees will look fine, but they'll be burning inside, and then they'll sometimes burn 70 feet up. It's wild, it's like a chimney. This is my friend Tim's ranch. It's been in their family for about 100 years, and it's one of the last family farms on the North Coast. And they were already doing a GoFundMe campaign to save the farm from taxes and things. And I just drove by it the other day, and it's pretty crispy, but the croplands got saved and the old buildings got saved. This is an aerial view of the lower part of Big Basin State Park. This is Waddell Creek Draw, in case you've ever been out here. This is a view looking south at the mountains that were on fire. This is my friend Craig and Heidi's home. They're avid environmentalists, and strangely, the fire takes some things and not others. It didn't take this flag. I don't know why. It's amazing. But their house is gone. Some places the fire crashed along the floor. It doesn't go up into the trees, but in other places it was crowning and killing all the trees. This is my driveway. In the middle of the fires, I got up there to get my car and I took this picture. This was our little recording shed studio, and our house is down here in the smoke. And then we left again. We didn't really know if we were going to have a house. This is one of the firefighters who stayed and defended, and you can see over here green and over here burned. And without these local residents, all of this would be black. They were the real heroes, the unsung heroes. And a couple of times we were noticing that the sheriff was ejecting some of them because they weren't really supposed to be there. But those who stayed formed these organized pods of firefighters and amateurs. A lot of 20 and 30-year-olds stayed, and the old people left because of COVID and smoke inhalation. And they defended our mountain. This is Big Basin State Park after the fire. This is one of the bathrooms. And these are the guys that did finally come and defend my home. And I got to meet them quite a few weeks later and thank them. And they were from Humboldt County, far in Northern California, under mutual assist. And I got to thank them, and they got to show me a couple places that burned that I had no idea on my property burned. Okay, so that's a little view. I'm going to go back here just for a second and play some of our coverage because we're radio people, not just visual people. All right, so I want to show you some things and actually play you some things. So I might have to, we'll see if you can hear this. I don't think you can. Okay, so what I'm going to do is stop share and then change the settings maybe when I share my screen. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Nope. Sorry. I'll get this in a second. Thanks for being patient. All right. That's what I wanted. See if this now will play for you.
Hygiene recommendations to help improve your sleep. I do have a YouTube video that I put on with an organization at Mississippi State, and you can just do a YouTube search for sleep hygiene with Courtney Bolstad.
All right, and that's Bolstad. Yep. Courtney Bolstad. Thank you. And do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners, Courtney?
I think my biggest piece of advice right now, and I need to take it myself, is just to give yourself some space. Allow yourself to kind of, like we were saying, just come to that sleep, take a breath, and take things in stride.
Thank you, Courtney. That's really good advice. We all could use that. Well, take care, and maybe we'll talk again. Thanks for being on the show.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Okay. So next week we will speak with Grace Cheptu, an archetypal dreamwork practitioner who in
very, very bad shape, yet you completely did your professional newsman thing. In the back of your mind, were you experiencing that too, where the working, doing your thing, your profession was almost therapeutic?
I just needed to know that the house was still standing and people were still alive. So I came back to my house and had to shoulder open the door because the house was askew and it was, just couldn't open in the door frame. And there was a note tacked onto the door that said, "Have gone to find Mom." And I thought, well, okay, at least one person's alive. I know that, and they're taking care of it. So I went back to work, continued on. And the only reason I stopped at my house is that we were driving by it. We're coming up from Watsonville. It's the only way we could get through to Santa Cruz. And I just want to stop in and see if it's there. And yeah, okay, fine. And I kept telling myself, well, this is not so bad. This is not so bad. And that's the reaction that a lot of people had in Santa Cruz County when they, folks from outside of the area would ask them, wow, there were generally two answers. Oh, it's not so bad, or it's pretty bad. Now, it's not so bad meant the chimney's gone, every piece of glass in the house is gone, the house is completely, almost off its foundation, but still standing. That's not so bad. Well, pretty bad means the house is in splinters at the bottom of a canyon.
Mm-hmm. What is it about Santa Cruz to both of you? I've been here a long time, but there's something about this community. Again, we've been battle tested, we've been trauma tested, or in the words of John Irving, we've been through this once. And we rose to it. And I think I do believe there's something unique in this community, that it pulls together. There's something different about Santa Cruz. And I'm not just patting our community in the back. We've seen it in operation, and we're seeing it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to just kick in that one of the things that can be really helpful as you're dealing with trauma is actually to keep busy. And one of the ways to keep busy is to help somebody else. And that if you can help somebody else, that will help you feel better. I mean, my hosts where I'm camped said that this is helping them feel like they're doing something. So contributing money, helping a friend, and I think Santa Cruz has already been a very tight community with the university. There's a certain air of Santa Cruz of kind of liberalism or something that we feel like there's a lot of commonality among our neighbors. That there's a way that we really can see each other's, feel ourselves in each other's shoes. But for anybody who wants to feel better, and this really applies anytime, not just during crisis, if you want to feel better, help somebody else. It really works.
Tony?
I'm going to stop sharing for a second and share a different piece. So we did a lot of updates from CAL FIRE. We did a lot of interviews of evacuees. We also did some post-fire stories that I want to share with you. And we have this story to share from my neighbors that were, unfortunately, their home was not saved, but they were able to tell their story on a show about mental health during traumas, and I thought it was a wonderful show. It was also really helpful. So give me a second to find it. There it is. It's queued up, so hopefully it'll all work out. And then I want to hear some of your stories and questions. So let me just get my act together here with the sharing. Put that up there. We're such radio people, huh? Tech. Okay. Here we go. So this is a show hosted by a psychotherapist named Deborah Sloss, and she had Sam and Sarah Clarkson, 2 fire survivors, on the show, as well as a psychologist whose specialty is trauma.
A few hours later, the evacuation order came for Boulder Creek. As night fell, I could see the flames rise behind the town from my window. I watched through the night while my family slept. What if an ember landed here? We would have no warning. I started packing instruments and photo albums. I was thankful that for years we have kept an updated fire evacuation list, because even though the fires were still several miles away, my mind was completely blank. Everything in me said, get out, just get out. Packing to evacuate was different for me than for my Bonnie Doon friends. We were granted the time they did not have. That time was filled with 1,000 goodbyes, 1,000 moments of grief as I looked at all the things that must be left behind. I said silent farewells to each one, remembering with gratitude the moments of life they represented and the joys they held. The hardest was the piano. I know it like my own hands. I cried hard and then went back to packing. We left before the evacuation order came. All our neighbors left at the same time. It was 109 degrees while we carried boxes out to the cars. As we drove out of the neighborhood, we stopped to wish one neighbor well. You have a place to go? We asked each other. Our children had trick-or-treated at his house since they were big enough to walk. He was always so happy to see them. Would this be the last time I saw him? We waved goodbye. Hope to see you soon, we said.
Sam, Sarah, I wonder as you listen to that person's story, if there was anything in there that you could relate to yours or that you'd want to mention because you think there's a commonality there.
I wish I had a list. I was not that prepared, and I wish I had brought more photo albums. I remember that the first, I guess the Martin fire, I actually did load up the car with like every photo album and took everything off the wall, and it was such a pain to put back. I was like, I'm not going to do that again. But out of my laziness, and I wish that I hadn't been so lazy and that I had just done it, because I wish I had some of those things now.
Sam, was there anything that you heard that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there, but I'm definitely experiencing grief. I mean, I randomly get choked up when I see fire trucks or the signs around town. Thank you, firefighters. It's like, and there is this deep well of gratitude that people are willing to take firefighting on, and, at the same time, didn't work out for us. And I definitely, if you'll allow me to just like proselytize a little bit about handmade ceramics, we had thousands of handmade pots in our house. We had been collecting for 25 years. And, friends, each pot has a story. Every time you take clay and you fire it, it becomes a recording of the human interaction with earth and with fire, with water. And, and they're all unique and they all tell a story. And, I thought more would survive. I thought because they'd been to 2,350 degrees that they'd kind of be able to, you know, that was my assumption that more would survive, and very, very, very little did in any usable, certainly no usable state. So yeah.
Okay, I want to share one more video with you, and then open it up to questions and comments and discussion about how you capture the moment. I do want to say that stories like that are being captured by the local Museum of Art and History. They, Nikki Silva, who is one of the Kitchen Sisters of Kitchen Sisters fame, is among our volunteers and does a regular local show. And she's going to be interviewing fire survivors, and our local photographer Shmuel Fowler will be photographing people with things they saved and talking about not only their fire stories, but what they saved from the fires and what it meant to them. We did this during the earthquake of 1989, and we have a whole archive that historians now study. So radio stations can be part of that if you save your audio. Like, make sure you have a good archive is my final thought. This is a very homemade video that I'm going to share with you that I made between being evacuated and not really supposed to going up there, but I snuck up there to get my car. So let me share this, and then we'll hear from you. Give me just a second to move all of my little screens around. Here we go. There it is. Okay. This is my property in the middle of the fire when it was still smoking. There's a lot of smoldering logs, but I don't think they're going to catch anything. Hopefully. I'm going to come back, make sure all of the stumps are out. Cars are packed. Cabin is fine, no cinders on it. There's our heroes, Bay, Kellen, who have come up here 3 times to help us get our stuff out. There's the house, wide open to the smoke. Yeah.
This is your mirror.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Delicate. All right, and I'm going to walk over to the neighbors now. See what's going on over there. It's starting to pick up wind, so we're going to get out of here really soon because I know I'm going to be here. There's our tree house my dad built. 1 brick standing. Still the rope swing didn't burn. Our outbuilding, okay. Generator ready to go. Gasoline, if we should ever come back. Some ash on this porch. It's not burning. Thankfully. Going over to our neighbors to take a picture for them on the friendship path. There's a garden looking beautiful. Without water, it's still thriving thanks to previous watering by neighbors. I'm walking over to my neighbors right now. My eyes are burning. I'm going to get out of here as soon as possible. But I want to take a picture before we go. Egan's looking good. Metal roof. Okay, there's the wind. We need to get out. Tenant's house, fine. Egan house, looking good. Nothing burned. Just between our houses. Ping pong table, still intact. Tree across road. That's going to be a problem. Cinders, balls between the houses. The smoking remains of Andy and Teresa's house. This tree that fell over is still burning at the base, and it took out the power lines with it. So that's going to be a mess. Okay. Looks like a total loss here. Thanks to the firefighters who did what they could. It looks like our neighbor is using his bobcat
And that's all I have to report at.
Okay, so that was in the middle of the fires. It's hard to report objectively when your house might be burning down. I was so relieved and so lucky. My house still stands. And then you have survivor's guilt. But you keep reporting because, you know, people need to know what the heck's going on. So that was my solace. And now I want to open it up to you and ask you to tell me what capacity does your station have, even if you're all volunteer like we are, who would you send out if something like this happened, whatever it might be? And how would you coordinate all of their input so that it stayed factual, it kept coming, and kind of somehow integrated? Because one of the things I didn't have time to share with you was one of our hosts, Eric, he does a music show, but he just integrated music with reports, so we would seamlessly go between music, and we broke format. There was no format anymore. It was just, this is happening, this is what our whole community's going through, this is what we're going to do. And there was no, oh, this is my show. It was not like that. Everybody just jumped in from whoever and whatever they were. But I'd love to hear from you any questions you might have, and then also any ideas for making this happen in your particular situation.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was wonderful and heartbreaking all at the same time. We so appreciate you sharing with us those intimate moments and also the practicality of the work that we do during times like that. We do have a lot of folks on the conversation with us today, which is wonderful. So in order to facilitate some of the questions, I'm going to go through some folks who have already added questions into the chat box, if you don't mind, and we'll start off that way. And when I reach out to you, if you want to start your camera and unmute yourself to ask your question, that way we can actually engage that way. I've got so far Jim, Radio, Jeannie, and we'll also hear from Ruth and Betty if you guys want to get ready. But Jim, up first, did you want to ask your questions? There was a few comments there with concerns or questions about who was reporting, whether they were non-news persons, non-pro, and that way, and how we kind of expand our staffs during times like this. Jim, did you want to jump in? And if not, Rachel, you can go ahead and take that.
I would love to. We did kind of quick training on the fly of some of the people who are a little less experienced. You know, we told them how to identify themselves. We have little ID badges that we need to get into the station. So I said, just use that for now. We'll get you a press pass. I didn't tell them to go, you know, behind police lines or anything like that. I just said, talk to the people. Go talk to people in the evacuation center. And if you have any trouble getting in there, you know, they wouldn't let us inside for privacy reasons because people needed their space, but anybody who was outside, we could ask. So we did a little mini trainings, but thankfully, like I said, we had a former newsman from television joining us. We had me, we had a couple of other people who have long experience, and then for the newbies, we just said, you know, how to hold your mic, how to be respectful, and during COVID, you know, you really want to get as far away as you can. Maybe if you have a selfie stick, you know, use that so you don't have to get near them like you normally do when they talk. It helped to have our program director in studio and me in studio who could take calls, and also we were playing stuff right off our phones a minute or two after we had gathered them. So if you know how to do interviews well enough and just stop and start it at the right moment, you can get stuff in the field and run in and literally play it off your phone on the auxiliary.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for that. I'm doing a workshop later, and part of it is on press credentials. People who are reporters but maybe didn't go to J school and they're just a local hippie farmer kind of person, and then you get people who are just trying to sneak in for nefarious purposes, and of course then we saw the very worst of it, people setting fires or blaming other people for setting fires. How do you deal with, in being a small nonprofit volunteer-driven group, how do you know who's, or how does the local sheriff or CAL FIRE know who's legit and who's not? please.
We have connections. We're a pretty small community. Santa Cruz is like 80,000 people. Our county's 260,000. So they know us already from the last few disasters, and they have our names, and we have their press contacts. So we funnel things through a couple of people. We don't just hand out press credentials to just everybody, but we also have really well-trained and trusted.
And does the state of California or your county authorize press credentials, or is it just up to individual stations, papers, and whatnot?
The sheriff's department does. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And up next, I'm going to unmute Jeannie. She had a question about concerns and safeguards about giving out bad info, particularly related to evacuation orders and shelters. Jeannie is with us now. You can go ahead and jump in. Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, that was basically my question, concerns and safeguards about giving false information, or not false, inaccurate information, since it's always a fast-moving situation under fire circumstances. By the way, I'm from KZFR, which is city of Chico, Butte County, California. That's where the Camp Fire was 2 years ago, and where we're still experiencing fires now. And then also curious about what kind of parallel coverage you may have sent out via any social media channels like Twitter or Facebook. I know in my area that's my one of my go-tos for information on what's up with fires. Thanks a lot. Excellent coverage. Glad to see the follow-up, especially regarding self-care and the emotional trauma that follows individuals and a whole community after these horrible disasters. Thanks.
Thank you. Those are really good questions. We kind of went into damage control for social media, because the thing you want the most during a fire and any natural disaster is you want to know where it is and how many acres and whether it's consumed your particular property or your friend's property. And you can't get that. But we did have a Facebook page that was just allowed for people who lived here. And that was some of the more up-to-the-minute information, strangely. We were also getting CAL FIRE updates twice a day, one at 6 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. And in between that time, we were in touch with the press officer at the county supervisors, the sheriff. But some of those stories I mentioned to you about that CAL FIRE really was very scarce was not the official story. So we had to verify that a number of times before reporting it. And it is a problem. People tend to exaggerate, or there's a lot of hearsay. So you have to ask people, well, how do you know that? Where do you know it from? It's a real issue. So sometimes we were getting online and saying, no, that's not right. Do not do that particular thing that people are saying, So it's real.
Thank you for that question, Jeannie. Rachel, is there any way for you to up your mic volume at all or speak a little louder?
I can get closer. How's that? Is that better?
Great. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
great. Yeah, I have a Yeti, and the gain is up. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. How's that?
Thank you. We appreciate that.
No, rumors kill people. Someone's right about that. You don't want people to panic either. So, you have to not panic yourself on the radio. It doesn't help anybody. Run for your lives. That's what the reverse 911 is for. So.
Next up, we have a question from Ruth. Ruth, I'm going to unmute you now. Our next question is going to come from Ruth. I'm going to unmute you now and let you jump in. The question was, at the first sign of crisis, what did you do to galvanize all hands on deck and coordinate action to address all different aspects of this disaster?
We got a quick meeting together on Zoom with our program director and all the volunteers we felt could handle this level of quick moving story. And we made a plan that we were going to go on break format for the foreseeable future as long as we could do it. We couldn't do it 24/7 because we didn't have enough people. So we did it in like 3 or 4 hour chunks, and then we'd come up hourly. So we did it pretty quickly and seamlessly. I was so proud of the way it came together. And listening back, we had some very calm, organized people. They weren't always as tech savvy as others, but they were good on the mic. And so there were people scampering around behind them, switching off between somebody's phone, the internet, a phone call coming in, and that type. So having someone who's just tech on your side would be really helpful.
Can I follow up from that? Okay, good. I'm here in Louisville with our own station, Forward Radio, and it's also community, LPFM. And I'm curious to know about, cities have their own emergency plans. And now that we in Louisville could possibly be on the verge of an emergency, who knows? What can we do in preparation? Like, for example, can we tie in with city emergency plans? Can we establish relationships with city emergency personnel? So we have the luxury of not being in a crisis right now. I'd like to know what we should be doing as preparation.
It's a really important question, and we have approached our county's emergency office, and they have not filled that directorship position because of budget cuts. So we're left with the county information officer, who's supposed to give out information about all kinds of things. But developing a relationship when there is no emergency is highly recommended, and getting on the email list for every single public information officer there is at the city and county level, becoming known to the sheriff's department, becoming known to the fire department, and just get them to put your email or the main contacts for your station's email on every list they have for press releases and bulletins. They should be happy to have a way to communicate. However, sometimes they think internet is enough. And I think they need educating about this wonderful resource that radio is.
Thank you.
That's a great question, Ruth. Thank you. Next, I'm going to unmute Betty. You asked a question about offering a way for listeners to report on the status of a fire from where they were. In one Oregon fire, this kind of information was not getting to radio listeners. And Betty, you are unmuted now.
Great, thank you. What happened in Oregon, I'm going to talk about Lincoln City, which is on the coast and usually does not experience the kind of fires we had this summer. People were trying to evacuate. They've been told, go. And they were in their cars and there was gridlock. Our friends were in the same spot for an hour and 20 minutes without knowing what was going on. Why weren't the cars moving? What's with the highways? They're on fire already. And there's no community radio in the city yet, but they really had no way to find out stuff except their son, closer to Portland, who was following the internet. You can't count on that for everybody. Is there a way for reports to come into the radio station from people who are on the street, if you will? Our friends could see this big black and red cloud coming toward them, not cloud, smoke plume, thank you, that's the word. And they thought, we're just gonna have to get out of our car and run for the beach, because they had no idea what was going on. So how did you deal with that, Rachel?
One thing you mentioned, which is very common, is you cannot tell where a fire is based on what you're seeing in the sky. In that interview you heard from Sarah and Sam Clarkson, she stayed almost too late. She was watching it come toward her, and because of previous fires not getting to them, she thought she had more time than she did, and she ended up having to evacuate quickly with hardly anything. So I don't know the answer. I don't think you want to necessarily use eyewitness accounts for evacuation information because it's extremely inaccurate. I think that we have to rely on the emergency people to tell us which zones are evacuated. And to the credit of these folks, they were overly cautious. And like I said, they evacuated almost a third of our county. The town of Scotts Valley was probably not in any danger, but after the Tubbs fire and the Paradise fires up in Northern California, where so many people lost their lives, they're not taking any chances. And I hope they didn't in your area. I hope that helps.
Well, thanks, Rachel. A little follow-up here. Apparently, the situation you had in Santa Cruz is different than what's happening in Lincoln City. You said you had good updates from officialdom, and in Lincoln City, the updates were coming about every 4 hours, and that just wasn't frequent enough. I recall a couple of years ago there was a fire in Santa Rosa where they did take calls from people in the field, and those apparently were going well.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all for sure. And I don't want to discount the wisdom of the people who are right in the middle of something. Sometimes they see things like our people did on the mountain that no one saw, which was there were no firefighters. And they had to stay. So there are wisdoms to be had. I don't want to make a blanket statement. And you're right. You got to do what you got to do in an emergency. And sometimes you look back and wish you'd done something different. But if you can save lives by accurate and immediate reporting, that's the best thing we can do.
Great. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Betty. Our next question comes from Louisa from KYU. This is a pretty lengthy question. So Louisa, I'm going to unmute you and let you jump in. But the question really is about equipment, sending with volunteers, and how do we get folks to report and not spread rumors and panic? Louisa, you should be unmuted now. You can join us.
Yeah, so we are in Northern California in the August complex, and we've been doing a lot of reporting on our station. But we definitely have a lot of, we've been doing reporting from official sources and live interviews with the sheriff. But as far as, reporting from people on the ground, there's just a lot of fear of panic and rumors spreading among people. So I guess, we've kind of talked about that already. But the other question was just about 4 people who were going, out and interviewing people, the equipment that people were using for that.
Some people had their own Zoom recorders, not to be confused with Zoom online. Some people had just their phones, and they got surprisingly good audio. If you have an iPhone with voice memos, you can do great interviews. I suggest a selfie stick for that, so you don't have to get, 3 feet from them as long as your arm.
Louisa, did that answer your question okay? And if so, we will move on to our next question from Jim. I will unmute you now. The question is there a way to coordinate through all these communities?
Yeah, let me ask the question. First of all, thank you very much for sharing this with us. Myself and others have been developing a national public affairs show that goes on for 2 hours a day since the COVID-19 crisis began, called GoingViral.news. And when we were trying to get people in the West to talk about this, we had a hell of a time because people are just, preoccupied with dealing with this horrible mess. So I'm wondering if there has been set up a coordination of all the community radio stations, starting from Washington on down through California and east of you all, so that, let's say for us back here in New York, we can bring people on and have them talk in a timely and accurate fashion about what the hell's going on out there with these terrible fires. And it's terrible to watch what's going on in Santa Cruz. That was one of the first places in California I fell in love with. So it's really heartbreaking to watch this happen. And it's just my heart out to all you guys. But I'm just wondering, how can we best coordinate with you guys in the West with what we do here in the East, so we can let our audiences hear what's going on out there?
It's a really tough question because, as you said, in the middle of an emergency, all you're focused on is, where's the shelter, where's the food, who's got what donation. And, being this topic being hyperlocal, we were literally talking about where the highway was closed. So that would not interest people as much as perhaps survivor stories later. the immediate up-to-date reporting was happening with the national press. Of course, as soon as other fires broke out, we fell off the front page. But the New York Times did some great reporting here. They were the first ones to tell the story. I think it was the New York Times, about the one person who died in the fire, who had taken a vow of silence and walked everywhere and thought he could outrun it. And there was another story told there about the renegade firefighters that stayed behind and saved hundreds of homes. So that was happening. People were coming in. I don't know how to answer that because, again, if we could, we would, but I think we were maxed out, with just what we were doing. And we would love to have been able to help. But if you had asked me at that moment, I probably would have said, can I talk to you in a week, after we recovered, because we were slammed. Yeah. And I really appreciate the reaching out. People did reach out from all over the country. It was so heartening. I mean, we're not the only ones who love this place. The world visits here a lot, and the world was listening and watching and pouring in their love and money. And some of these GoFundMe campaigns went to $50,000. My brother-in-law lost everything, and he got some money, to help rebuild his life because of all that care. So we're very grateful for the care.
Thank you for that question, Jim. Up next, Paul O'Rourke has a question. You are unmuted, Paul, if you'd like to go ahead. The question specifically was, the county emergency officials in Butte County do update their info on Facebook. There is a large problem with non-English updates. Direct reporting is important, but how do we get agencies to recognize radio?
We just have to go to their press briefings and ask a bunch of questions and get to know them personally, I think. That's what we did. We just kept showing up and saying, hey. Same thing with COVID reporting. We did a lot of reporting on that when it first was known, and as it's been going on, we keep doing these county briefings, and it's great to educate them about the power of radio. Sometimes they don't know, or they think they have to buy space on it. They just need educating. So talk to them when there's an emergency. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm unmuted. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so kind of the follow-up on that, in Chico and in Butte County, we've had 3 major disasters in the last 3 years, starting with the possible rupture of the Feather River Dam, and then the Camp Fire, and now what's going on now. After the dam evacuation, the county officials, who had no idea how to respond to that, I went into the radio station to try and start doing reporting, and when I started calling the first responder agencies, they were so busy evacuating themselves out of the water's way that they had nothing to say to anyone else. And they've all made progress since then, but maybe some ideas about how do we get into their agencies and start developing relationships as radio media first responders in ways that were on their short list, because it took hours just to wade through their bureaucracies to be able to get the things that we needed put out on the air. And then as far as our station here, the unfortunate part of it is we don't have anything in place in terms of, you mentioned one of the things to have ahead of time was a plan on format changes. And there's so many things of how do you get the things that you're reporting from the field out through the radio station that seem like they need to have some structural thing within the station as a plan, kind of the go bag for the station. So if you could just comment on all those things, that'd be great.
I'll try. Yeah, I'll start from the last one. Having a plan in place ahead of time when there's no emergency is a great idea. Having a policy, if you will, with your program manager and your manager and the programmers that are all aware that next time there's an emergency, we're going to break format and we're going all out all the time. And we'd love for you to be trained to be able to help us do that. We're all volunteer. We have a halftime program director and a halftime operations manager, and that's it. So we're that new. So, but we managed to pull this off. So I guess the go bag ought to be kind of a plan for how you're going to do that. Fortunately, we didn't totally break format because we weren't 24/7 live on the mic. We had music shows specifically picking their music to be calming and soothing and familiar, and and the person, if they weren't doing any kind of reporting at that moment, was encouraged and didn't need much encouragement to give encouraging messages constantly, and then read whatever there was, that reread it, read it and reread it, whatever updates there were. Going back to that, how do you make those connections with your local emergency responders? That just happens when you go to their meetings and you contact them when there's no emergency, and just get on every list, get the backdoor phone number. And if they're stonewalling you, I don't think they would, they're just busy. You can always go through your local county supervisor to ask them to help you, because they know these people as well.
Thank you. It looks like Paul would like to follow up there.
Yeah, and just the other part of my question has to do with Spanish, and in our area Hmong translated emergency response, and I know KBBS in Northern California, which is a bilingual Spanish-English station, had a lot of experience with the fact that their fire in 2017 really had no outreach to Spanish speakers. And I wonder what experience people out there have on trying to break that glass ceiling as well.
Some of our agencies gave us bilingual information, some of them didn't. I think we need to educate them and continue to ask for that. We also had people who are proficient readers coming in, because you can mess up information by mispronouncing it. So we made sure that we had bilingual speakers reading it as well, because there were some long press releases that came out in the beginning, and they were really important about where to go for shelter and food and assistance. So I think it is a job of radio to keep asking for that stuff so that they understand. A really poignant story here locally is our local AM station was giving out information once about a tsunami, which was going to be 3 feet high, which isn't like life-threatening. But the local Spanish language station made a mistake and said it was 3 meters high. And we wondered why all these cars were heading for the high points everywhere, and they were jammed at the gas station. And we finally realized that there had been this huge mistake. The 9 meter, 3 meter. Anyway, you can understand how important language is to radio, because people hear that and they freak out. It's really important to get it right.
Thank you for your question, Paul. If anyone has any other questions, you're welcome to drop them into the chat and we can go forward there. Rachel, did you have anything now after all these questions and hearing from folks, anything that's come to your mind that you'd like to discuss?
I guess I'm curious if you are thinking about documenting some of this stuff. How do you archive some of this coverage that you do when things are really intense? How do you save that? And have you thought about partnering perhaps with a local history, museum or local history association so that your community can preserve these moments? I hope they don't feel like, they're everyday moments anymore. I really hope that's not our future, but right now it feels like it. But looking back, I think people are going to want to know, what was going on. Just like the newspapers, the historic record, we have a different kind of record. We have people's emotions coming through their voices and personal anecdotes that you won't get in a paper. So I was just curious if anybody's thought about that and interested in learning more what our local museum is doing. We could probably put you in touch.
That is a great thought. It looks like we also have another question from Jim, and I have unmuted you. Jim, you're welcome to jump in whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks again, Rachel, for sharing this all with us. A thought comes to mind listening to you and seeing the comments from all the different folks from Oregon and Washington, et cetera. I think that this obviously is going to happen again. We all know it will. And I would propose to you all in the West Coast that I would personally want to see the stuff we're doing right now in the network, Pacifica Network, which is sort of under the radar. We're experimenting with a virtual 2-hour show. I'd like to bring all you guys on and talk about what the hell just happened with scientists, and listen, share with people your personal experience. Not so, because yes, you're right. If I'm in the middle of, you're in the middle of this terrible thing, and somebody from New York calls us, well, tell us what's happening. Yeah, the hell with you. I want to deal with what I'm dealing with right now. I totally understand that. But now we're a little, it seems it's past a little teeny bit. I still see it's terrible in other parts of the West Coast. And I think that it needs to be vividly brought home, all the complexities of why this is happening. And in particular, through your personal experiences. So that's just what I want to share and offer, because I think, we try to get people on east of Portland, and we started to have a debate about climate change with a guy. And I said, look, man, I don't want to argue about climate change with you. You guys just went through this terrible goddamn experience. So to me, that's what's important. I don't care about whether you think this or that. I want to hear what you went through. And, that's the whole thing. I mean, people need to hear what happened out there, because it's just absolutely hellish, and it's going to happen again. And there's all sorts of complicated issues that I think people need to hear the full sophistication of.
Thank you. I agree with you. And I think this post-fire coverage, I mean, it's not post-fire. Some people are still living through it. They don't have anywhere to live. So we don't want to fall into the trap that the mainstream media does, where, oh, the fire's out. I guess the fire's over. Well, let's move on to the next big story. This story is going to be a long time in our community. And that's what community radio can do, is keep the focus. Like, don't look away as your community, members become homeless. Help them get back in houses. We're in one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. And so we already had a housing crisis, and now there are families of 5 with 3 dogs trying to find a home. And it kind of, just like COVID has ripped the Band-Aid off our other problems. We have people camped before this happened all along the medians of the highway. There's a homeless encampment as you come into town. So clearly people are hurting already. And to look away and say, oh, let's move on to the next story, isn't doing them any justice. So again, we can do a lot. And like you said, get into a post-fire, post-disaster mode where we're talking about the long-term recovery. And there can be a positive part of that. What are people doing to revive the forest that got so badly damaged? What is it doing to revive itself? Let's talk to ecologists and find out and look and see what the natural world does after a fire of this type. So yes, all of the above. We're happy to talk. It's easier now than it was.
Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's not really, it's an ongoing dialogue about these kind of things. Thanks.
And, let's just take climate change again for a topic. It's irresponsible not to mention that we are experiencing climate change. These things have been made far worse by drought. We already had a bunch of dead trees on our property from bark beetles that were emboldened by the drought. So it's all connected, and I think we need to make those connections and help people understand them by bringing in, we're right next to a major research university, and we have some of the best, climate scientists in the world right here. Having them help us understand it is a great gift to our listeners, I think.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Just had a comment come in from Emma on the chat. Someone living in Santa Rosa. Right now, I agree with Rachel. The hurt definitely lingers after the fires, and discussing these tragedies is tough because those seriously affected have such long-term consequences. I know there's been a lot of great comments through the chat the whole time, so definitely feel free to look back through those. A lot of great quotes from the talk were shared there. There's also a question, Rachel, if you're interested in sharing your email with the participants, in which case you're welcome to put it right in the chat, and then folks can gather it from there. We are technically nearing the end of the program. Our next program starts at 2 o'clock, and that's going to be a workshop, Loud and Live, Taking Community Radio Remote with Sharon Scott of WXOX here in Louisville. So we have some time before then. I am more than happy to stay here in the conversation and let people chat. You are now able to unmute yourselves if there's any other questions that have come up toward the end, or Rachel, if you have anything else you'd like to add. We're so grateful for everyone joining us, and Rachel, such an amazing, inspiring, and heartfelt conversation. So we thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great, and I'm so happy to see fellow radio travelers all trying to figure out how to be in this moment that we're in and help our listeners get through it as well. I'm often using words like comfort and connection on the air a lot these days, and I think we are in a unique position, given everyone's so isolated, to connect us all and cause people to feel less alone, regardless of whether it's an emergency or an ongoing thing like COVID. We're just so lucky to have this resource, and to spread the word to our listeners that they can find that comfort here, I think is important. Thank you.
Well, Rachel, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the land in California is federally owned. I mean, I'm looking at the stats. A high percentage of the land is federally managed. And one of the things that Trump was bringing out was the whole question of forest management. And I was wondering what kind of response you have to that kind of question. When someone says, oh, it's because you're not managing the forest well, what do you say to that?
I say they are probably right, but they probably mean different things by management. Sometimes that's a smokescreen for log it all. Sometimes it's real that we have been suppressing fire in our ecosystem for a really long time in the so-called urban wildland interface. And by suppressing it, you let a lot of undergrowth grow, the fires burn hotter, and they kill the trees instead of sweeping under them. So I was speaking with our state representative who's about to be elected to Senate, John Laird, who used to be Jerry Brown's Natural Resources Secretary, on the air yesterday, and he said, I hate to say this, but he's partially right. And I think he was talking about, clearing undergrowth and doing controlled burns and things like that, which have not been done enough. And part of it is there isn't the money. We have such a backlog. And a lot of that lies back on the feet of the federal government. So to blame California is kind of silly when this is under the federal jurisdiction, as you said, about half of the wildlands. And to put it on individual homeowners is rough too. I don't know if you have a minute for me to share this aerial view of my community, but I could if you want to see this amazing shot. So they did drone photography. Let me just show it to you for a second here. Anybody wants to see this, it's really cool, but really amazing. Whoops, what happened? I didn't want to share that, sorry. Maybe I can't anymore. Let me try it again. Huh. Just won't do. Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Oh, I think I see. Okay, give me a sec. After I gave it that big intro. Here we go. Somebody did drone photography of our entire mountain. So you can now look down and move it around and just kind of appreciate or be horrified by how much was burned. And you can even look like right down at your own property and see what's left and what's not there. And if you want to go on this website, I can share it with you if you want. If anybody's interested in peeking in on the fire from above, you can kind of look at all the different sides of it and see where it burned completely and see where it didn't burn, and there's still some cars that didn't burn. Anyway, I wanted to just share that because it's pretty cool.
Yes, Rachel, if you'd like to put that link in the chat, I think folks are interested in seeing, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you also talk about the inmates fighting the fires? Because one of the things during the reporting was it was talking about how they didn't have enough inmates to be firefighters and there were actual shortages. And could you just give your insights into that issue?
What you said is what I heard too, that I heard the same thing you did. I wanted to know if Emma Meshies is still on the line. She might have left. I think she's related to someone I grew up with. I wanted to ask her that. See if she was. Okay. Thank you. You're totally welcome. It's great to be here. Anybody have any other thoughts you want to ask? If you're ever in Santa Cruz, come by and visit KSQD. We're over in the Harvey West neighborhood. We'd love to show you our tiny little studio.
So if folks do want to continue the dialogue, we have a Discord channel that people can jump on. And there's also a waiting room Zoom area that's just for chatting and hanging out that you can jump in any time of the day. All of those links are available on the virtualgrc.org website.